You probably have heard all kind of reports about Eritrea, so I'm not going to bore you with statistics, but over 300 prisons and 10,000 prisoners of conscience and hundreds of thousands of refugees from a tiny country of 4 million is a story that needs no elaboration. Out of all atrocities taking place in Eritrea, be it against dissident politicians, independent media professionals, religious leaders, and community elders, it is the plight of the youth that is the most harrowing. For with every young person that gives up hope and leaves the country, choosing a dignified death over undignified life in Eritrea, also dies a slow, agonizing death. Anything up to 3,000 young people join the hundreds of thousands in refugee camps in Sudan and Ethiopia. When Eritrea finally attained independence this month in 1991, the streets of every city were awash with children cheering the triumphant liberation fighters that they grew up hearing about. The story of valiant freedom fighters was the substance that every Eritrean home filled their children with, in an effort to instill a sense of superior purposefulness and sacrifice. That substance is probably what defeated Africa's largest army to end Ethiopian occupation and gain Eritrea its independence. So, at independence, children roamed the street and marveled at the magical ability of their older brothers and sisters to step off the mythical stories that they grew up on, whiz right into the tree-lined streets that they grew up on. Unfortunately, successive years would all too quickly turn that Eritrean dream into an unbearable nightmare, the reality of which would be played in the very lives of these cheering children who lined the streets to welcome their heroes home. Betrayed and bewildered, this generation of Eritreans is now scattered right across the globe, and with every year, the tragedy of its reality reaches new and untold levels that the world simply fails to grasp. In 1994, a year after Eritrea's official independence, following its victorious liberation in 1991, the government decreed an 18-month national service, and thousands of young people were recruited and drafted into the army. In 1998, a border skirmish between Ethiopia and former colonizer and Eritrea, war broke out. The war that was later dubbed senseless by many, including the president, claimed over 20,000 of the children who a few years ago were freely dancing on the streets to celebrate their dream come true. Over the following few years, all attempts to address Eritrea's growing problems would be thwarted. And in the summer of 2001, the entire generation would see the beginning of the end of their dreams. The freedom fighters that they grew up idolizing turned brutal, first against each other, then against the nation, and particularly against the youth. Freedom fighters who made demands for reform were arrested. All independent newspapers were shut, and the journalists disappeared into the country's expansive network of prisons. The University Student Union leader was also arrested, and protesting university students were subjected to punishments. The 18-month national service became an indefinite bondage from which death or exile were the only ways out. Churches were shut down, and religious leaders were persecuted. The only university was dismantled and replaced by boot camp institutes. The government's heavy-handed approach was a show of power to create a deep and immovable fear. Fear of the government, fear of losing the independence that was gained after so much pain, and fear of everyone else. The national service was the government's way of controlling young people. From the age of 16 or 17, high school students are required to be regimented into military units that controls everything of what they read, who they pray, through to the job and education opportunities that they are able to access. Breaking any of these rules could land anyone in jail. Where people are tortured, deprived of food, medication, and humiliated, fear became the most prevalent emotion in Eritrea. And as Eritrea's descent into the abyss accelerated, the bewildered generation began to flee the country, defying a shoot-to-kill policy as well as severe repercussions, including large sums of money levied as fine against parents whose children fled the country. Eritrea became one of the largest refugee-producing countries in the world. Refugee camps in Sudan and Ethiopia began to swell, with bewildered young people bearing the visible scars of their tormented reality. Yet, even as refugees, protection keeps eluding them. They are kidnapped by the Eritrean government officials in Sudan. They are forced into a precarious existence in refugee camps across the region. And when they try their luck fleeing further afield, they are either swallowed alive by the angry Mediterranean tides, with rescue attempts often too late or too reluctant, or they fall into the hands of a network of criminal human trafficking gangs who capitalize in their bewilderment and sell them or hold them at a ransom, extorting money from whoever is willing to pay for them. I'll show you a short video clip of me interviewing a hostage.
Hello. سامعك الله برهانة.
This was me interviewing a hostage. Once Eritreans flee from Eritrea to Sudan, they would be kidnapped and sold to the Bedouins in Sinai. They would then be tortured, gang raped, and their parents would listen to the torture over the phone, and the torture wouldn't stop unless you pay them ransom demanded. So the other picture that you saw was a young man that paid $50,000 for his family paid $50,000 for his release, and that's how he looked like 2 months after he was released. And after all that, even in places where one would expect a refuge, they are denied their basic rights as the asylum seekers that they are. In Israel, they are called illegal infiltrators. Yet, such in the resilience of the dream instilled in them, they don't give up fighting for it. They organize themselves and fight back. They first fight their own bewilderment and then the system that caused it. They organize rescue missions and lobbying missions, and they try and organize mass phone contacts with their counterparts in Eritrea to keep the dream alive. Let me tell you about the mass telephone calls, where a group that I have been working with for nearly 2 years have made over 90,000 calls and has become a household name in Eritrea. The Freedom Friday movement. One-to-one calls, automated mass calls, are made in an effort to engage Eritreans inside the country and encouraging them to show their resistance by taking actions that build their solidarity and their confidence. Inspired by the Arab Spring revolutions, but taking the Eritrean context into account, Freedom Friday calls to remind people that there are other things they can do, like emptying the streets of Eritrea every Friday and filling churches and mosques to pray for mercy on various occasions. This relationship and trust, both among the people and across with the diaspora activists, have encouraged a small but sturdy team to form inside the country. And their enthusiasm and boldness inspires everyone, including observers in the international community. Last week, they smuggled out a video clip of one of their posters in the heart of the capital city, taken as people read the posters in broad daylight. And in such a public place, it's extremely early days. And these are tiny baby steps, but the momentum of resistance doesn't follow the normal stages of development. The Arab Spring has demonstrated that. I'm fully confident that in time, Eritreans too will rise and challenge the most brutal dictatorship in Africa. I'm committed to that, as are my colleagues in the Freedom Friday movement, but we need your assistance. We need to learn from the experiences of the Arab Spring revolutions. We'll need to learn techniques of underground movements in other countries. We need to access technology and expertise in mass communication. Currently, we use commercial operators that are used by multinational businesses, and it's expensive. Around $3,000 every Friday is a lot of money to demand from the Eritrean community. So if you know any kind of technology that we can use, please feel free to share that with us. The events of January 21st, when a group of young soldiers stormed the Ministry of Information and attempted to control the media outlets and make their demands, is a glimmer of hope that things are changing in Eritrea, a faint glimmer of hope. Over 20 years of independence, Eritreans have started the long journey back to dignity, but we know it's not going to be an easy ride, and we are inviting all freedom-loving people to support us along the way. Thank you.